This is Doug DeMuro, and today we're going to talk about cars where I disagree with everyone else. Either I like the car way more than everybody else does, or I hate the car way more than everybody else does. These are the top cars where my opinion is different from everyone else's opinion. Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. So far, Cars and Bids has hosted more than 20,000 auctions of special, cool, exciting cars like this, and this, and this, and this. So, if you're looking to sell your enthusiast car, reach a wide audience at carsandbids.com. Okay, so the top cars where I disagree with everyone else. These are alphabetized. They're not like in numbered order where I come up with the most disagreed. They're just alphabetical. And I should say, most of the time when I review cars, my opinion lines up with the prevailing sentiment, which makes sense because good car reviewers who all say the same thing, I'm not going to be the one guy standing saying, no, they're all wrong. Like usually I drive the car and that feels the same. And this is generally teased out to be true when I go to product launches and we're all under embargo. And when it finally comes time for us to publish, we all have a fairly similar opinion, whether it's pro or con. And that's because car journalists who are experts in doing this, who have driven a zillion different cars, generally have a pretty good idea. Is this car great? Is this car bad? Where does this car rank, etc.? And so there are not a lot of times when I have prevailing different opinions. In fact, I went through hundreds and hundreds of my old videos, just like a list of the cars, and I could only think of maybe 20 cars where I disagreed with the general sentiment. And about half of them, it wasn't that much of a disagreement. But the other half, well, the cars I'm going to talk about today, I do have a pretty significant disagreement with how most people feel about these cars. And so today, I'm going to talk through. Starting alphabetically again with the BMW i8. I've reviewed the i8 twice, and both times I liked it. The general sentiment is that it is a terrible car, and it's stupid, and it's bad, and it's awful. I think most people don't like the i8 because, it was BMW's latest attempt at a sports car, and it wasn't particularly sporty. It was a 3-cylinder engine. It was a plug-in hybrid. This is a time when plug-ins were not as common as they are now when the i8 came out 10 years ago. And people were like so mad that BMW, noted former manufacturer of amazing, pleasurable sports cars, was suddenly making this stupid automatic, future-looking thing when they could have just done like a V8 manual true sports car. And I get that. However, if you take the i8 at face value, it's actually a pretty cool car. Their goal wasn't to make a V8 manual sports car. They wanted to make something that seems sort of futuristic and cool and exciting. And the i8, for its flaws, for what it could have been, when you think about what BMW was trying to execute, I think it was actually pretty cool. They wanted something that looked crazy, and the i8 looked crazy. I mean, it really, then especially, but also now, had like a very futuristic, very exciting, crazy look to it that was just, people would see it. What is this thing? I remember, when they first came out and even a few years later, people had them on Turo, and you could go rent one and drive it around, and you'd get all the looks and all the attention because it was just such an absolutely insane car. It wasn't that expensive. And it was also relatively fun to drive. People, it's a 3-cylinder. Well, it's a 3-cylinder with electric assist, and obviously small motors with electric have become more common now, but it had like 306, 400 horsepower, some decent amount, and it was quick. It was a quick car that cornered flat, that steered well. It was fun to drive. And I especially like the i8 now that it has become relatively affordable. This is a $35,000 to $40,000 car. That's a pretty good bargain considering what it offers. I understand that it is not the main, it's not an E46 M3, it's not a Z3 M Coupe, but it's a fun car. And given what BMW was trying to execute, I actually think it was executed in a fairly reasonably exciting manner. And I think they're cool cars. And frankly, I think if you ask the general public, not car enthusiasts, but the general public, they would agree. It's cool. And it is. Next up, cars where I disagree with everyone else. This is a huge disagreement I have with most people. The new BMW M2. The new BMW M2, which everybody just complains about. All people do is complain about the new M2. New M2 is out, and just complain. And the way it looks, the fact that it's bigger. And I want to just slap all these people and say, look, this is the end. You're seeing the last 6-cylinder manual transmission, rear-wheel drive BMW. Like this used to be BMW's bread and butter. When I was a kid, this is what they did. And you are seeing the end of it. This is the last of the last. you should appreciate the fact that you are still living in an era when BMW is manufacturing a car like this, because soon you won't be. This is where it all stops. The next one's going to be an automatic plug-in hybrid, whatever. This is it. This is the end of the line. And I understand the complaints about it not being that attractive. Frankly, I like how it looks. I preferred how the previous one looked. I preferred how the 1M looked back in 2011, of course. It's a weird looking car a little bit, but I look past that in 2 seconds, especially when I get behind the wheel and drive the car. The new M2 drives wonderfully. It is the last gasp of still performance, still a BMW from what I remember it like as a kid. You know, Ken always complains BMW has lost the plot, they've changed, they're not the same brand as they were. That's true. But there are still a few bright shining stars, which isn't true for some brands. Some brands have no bright shining stars. They used to be something and they've changed. BMW still has a few, and the M2 is one of them. And my view is when a manufacturer releases a car like this, we should be happy about the fact that they're even still doing cars like this, instead of being like, oh, the front end is ugly, that's why I'm not buying it. Oh, the fenders are ugly, that's why I'm not buying it. No, you're not buying because you never were going to buy a car like this in the first place. We all know that. You just want to complain online. But the truth is, it's a special thing to still have vehicles like this in existence. And I'm thrilled that it's still here. I really am. Okay, next car where I disagree with everyone else. This is going to be controversial, the Ferrari Testarossa. And actually, I'm going to add the Lamborghini Countach to this and make a full holistic point here. The Ferrari Testarossa and the Lamborghini Countach were rival cars back in the 1980s. And the Countach was generally agreed to be the insane one. And as time has gone on, there's been more appreciation for the Countach, of course, has become beloved, but the Testarossa has gained some appreciation, and I don't really think it's warranted, to be honest. They cost about the same when they were new, and now the Countach is many multiples higher, and I think that's a reflection of two things. Number one, the Testarossa isn't that rare, but also it's a reflection of the fact that the Countach was a groundbreaking and amazing and exciting and insane car, and the Testarossa, at its core, was a copycat of all that. Lamborghini had come out with the mid-engine V12 supercar, and Ferrari, who had prior to that only made front-engine V12 supercars, ran to the drawing boards to try to get at Lamborghini. They had to come up with something. And so Ferrari had the Boxer, and then they had the Testarossa, and then Ferrari realized they were never going to beat Lamborghini, and they bailed on the mid-engine V12 supercar and went back to front-engine cars in that segment, which was the right call, except for the one-offs like the F50. And Lamborghini continues this bloodline. Miura, Countach, Diablo, Mercy, Aventador, and now Revuelto, which is amazing as well. And I find it to be interesting that there's been this kind of groundswell of excitement about the Testarossa in the last few years. It's just not that great. It was a copycat car of the Countach, in my opinion. I never liked how it looked. And also, it just doesn't drive all that well. And the cool thing about the Countach is it had this groundbreaking, the wedge shape. It basically invented the wedge design, which became so popular. It was the first car ever with scissor doors. It was kind of the beginning of the insane supercar as we know it today. And the Testarossa just never offered what the Countach did. It was just Ferrari's attempt at doing what Lamborghini was doing, and frankly, not a successful attempt. Now, the market agrees with me. Countaches are again, like I said, worth 4 or 5 times what Testarossas are worth, and they deserve to be. But a lot of people really hold the Testarossa in this high esteem that I just don't quite understand. It is simply not that great, not that original, not that special, and not that cool looking, when the Countach is all of those things. And on the subject of the Countach, in terms of cars where I disagree with people, you know, people always come up to me every time I drive the Countach to Cars and Coffee, but doesn't it drive like crap? That's the first thing they say. And I just want to slap them in the face and say, get in. Let's do this, and take him for a spin and say, you think it drives like crap now? Like, yeah, it's this old agrarian kind of thing, but all cars were like that back then, and this one sounds unbelievable. It is an absolutely amazing, menacing, crazy driving experience. And when people talk about, oh, it's not that great to drive, well, but it's an old car. Like all these 70s, 80s cars are by modern standards not that great to drive. The thing that separates this car is it's just absolutely insane. It feels insane. It drives insane. It's a ridiculous thing. And the experience is so amazing. And I think that's what makes Countach so great. And frankly, by comparison, Testarossa does not have that same experience. You don't have the same level of sound. You don't have the same visual drama, the same craziness. Ferrari created the Testarossa to copy the Countach and instead watered it down to things that, in my opinion, make the Countach so special. So my disagreement here is that I think the Testarossa Testarossa isn't as great as people say, and I think the Countach is better than people say. And when I think back about the 80s mid-engine exotic car wars, Countach has won. It was always the winner, and now it is finally getting the recognition it deserves, and I'm thrilled about that because there was a time when Testarossa values were higher than Countach values. It made no sense. The market liked them better, and finally people have come around to understand what makes the Countach so special, and I think the Testarossa's general languishing shows that somewhat people agree with me, but I just want to make it really clear how I feel. Okay, next car where I disagree with everyone else. This is a car where most people watching will agree with me, but most everyone else's will disagree with me, and that's the Ineos Grenadier. I loved the Ineos Grenadier. I think it's awesome. And a lot of the reviews that I read were tremendously critical of it. And I think that people who review that car critically totally miss the point of what that car is about. I see complaints about the ride quality, the harshness, the aero, the wind noise, the everything, basically, that it simply isn't like refined enough. And I want to just hit these people and say, that's the point. It's not refined enough. That's the point. But I think a lot of the people who review the car that way are not old SUV enthusiasts. And I'm an old SUV enthusiast. I have an old G-Wagon now. I had an old Land Rover Defender. I had an old Toyota Land Cruiser. I have had all of the old SUVs. And that's the world I live in. And so getting into the Ineos Grenadier felt like home to me. In fact, my only real criticism of the Grenadier, aside from a few switchgear related things, my only real criticism is I think the engine is too refined. I think that the whole intent of the car was to be this blocky utilitarian truck, but then they use this kind of smooth BMW 6-cylinder and it doesn't work. And I wish that we in the States had gotten the diesel version, which I imagine feels like a little bit more lumbering. That's my criticism. I actually think the powertrain is too smooth. I think the car in general is a great example of what they were trying to do. And I think the reviews that are negative about it miss the plot of what the car was supposed to be. And I think they did a great job making the car precisely what it was supposed to be. And I love it. And I love the Ineos Grenadier for what it is. And I think it's a great execution of this thing that not many people want anymore, but some still do, proven by the sales. Okay, next car where I disagree with everyone else, the Lexus LFA. I recently made a video about the most disappointing cars I've reviewed, talked about my experience with the LFA there. I'll briefly mention it again here. I have always felt that the LFA, when the LFA was new, the general sentiment among car reviewers, among car enthusiasts was that the LFA was not that great of a car. It took them decades to develop it. It was laughable how long it took. And then when it came out, it didn't drive all that amazingly. It didn't look all that great. There were very few of them. It was way too expensive. There was not much interest in them, honestly. A lot of them sold to Lexus dealers who just bought them kind of to take Toyota and Lexus out of a bind. And over the years, this legend has grown. Oh, the LFA is so cool. And now I see people online in forums being like, I've always loved the LFA. And it's like, no, you didn't. I was there. I remember when that car was new, there wasn't a lot of interest. There wasn't a lot of desire for that car. And now there's some revisionism going on. But the truth is, as someone who's driven one, it's just not that great. It doesn't drive all that well. The transmission is tremendously clunky. I'll never forgive them for that. You know, they could have done a manual. They could have waited and done dual clutch. They did neither. They chose the worst transmission option, and it really affects the driving experience. And I never found the car to be that good looking either. It is the best sounding car ever made. It really is. I just wish the powertrain had gone into something else. And I just don't agree with the current prevailing sentiment about that car. Okay, next car where I disagree with everyone else. This is one that a hill I will die on, the NC Mazda Miata. This is the third generation Mazda Miata, sold like 2006 to 2012 or 13, around there. And people don't like this. People call this the worst Miata, which to me is like saying the worst day in heaven. Like, okay, yeah, it's the worst Miata. I mean, I agree with that. But like, it's still, if they had just come out with that car, just the NC, and there was no NA, NB, or ND, people would be like, oh, the Miata, so cool. People only don't like the NC because of because they're able to compare it to the NA, NB, and ND. It's a little bigger. It's a little weird looking. It doesn't drive quite as well. You know, it had lost a little of the plot from the earlier cars, but not much. Drive an NC. It's still a thrilling car to drive. It's fun to toss around. It's got great steering and handling. It's a really, really nice car. It's just fun. It simply is a good, fun car. And I think people wrongly beat up on the NC Miata. I think it totally deserves more praise than it gets. And I really, really have always enjoyed every experience that I've had in the NC. I prefer the ND. I think the ND is the best Miata ever. Love the NA and the NB, of course. Certainly the NC is the worst Miata, but again, that's hardly a complaint. I mean, it's still better than basically every other sporty car in its era. It was just a really well executed car, just maybe not as perfectly executed as some of the other Miatas. Okay, next car where I disagree with everyone else. This is a big disagreement I have with basically everyone else, and that is the Mercedes-Benz EQS, which I absolutely adore. A lot of people hate it, and there's a lot of reasons to hate it. A lot of car purist type people hate it because it's electric. I don't want an electric car, it's stupid. Okay, fine. Then a lot of car enthusiasts, even who are willing to accept an electric car, hate it because it's ugly. And I've seen some of the criticisms that this car has gotten that are totally unfair. And I think some of it is on the fact that people really don't like how it looks, and they have transferred that hatred to other parts of the car that it just doesn't deserve hatred for. I've seen people call it low quality. I've seen people complain about the ride. That is laughable to me. As a guy who has spent a lot of time in comfortable cars because I hate getting beat up anymore, the EQS is a seriously comfortable car, and the interior is really high quality. Another thing that car purists don't like about it is a lot of screens. Put a lot of screens in a car. It's an easy way for automotive purists to be like, that car has too many screens. But for those of us who actually know what consumers are looking for, technology and screens is a big part of modern luxury cars. And I think the criticism about the EQS has been way totally overblown. It is a little bit weird looking, but it's also kind of cool and futuristic. And mostly, it's just a damn good car. It is comfortable. It is high tech. It breaks a lot of the things enthusiasts like. It's electric, they hate that. It's weird looking, they hate that. It's way too many screens, they hate that. But for a luxury car buyer, it is a damn good experience. And I think the EQS is a seriously excellent car. And if I were choosing between an EQS and an S-Class, I would choose an EQS if I was buying one used, because boy, have they depreciated. Mostly because there's been a lot of criticism. There's not a lot of buyers. But I think it's misplaced. I think the EQS is a really great electric version of an S-Class, and every time I'm able to drive or ride in one, I am thrilled. It is a nice car. Okay, next one, down to the last few cars where I disagree with everyone else. This one is a little multifaceted. I'm going to first talk about the Mini Countryman, and then I want to talk about Mini in general. The Mini Countryman gets a lot of hate because it's a crossover Mini. They took the Mini, it was so small, and they made an SUV. And then people hate Mini because of the same thing. Like, the Minis used to be cool and fun, and now they're dumb. Now they're big. People say, I disagree dearly with this. I think that the Mini Countryman is the greatest little crossover there is. Yes, it's an SUV-ified Mini, and so from a purist perspective, yes, you can't make a Mini when it's an SUV, but like, have you driven the other small luxury crossovers? They all are the most boring vehicles you will ever spend time in your entire life. Have you been in an Acura RDX? Have you set foot in an Infiniti QX50? No, nobody has. But the point is, have you been in a Lexus NX? Like, those cars are so dull. The Mini Countryman is fun. Yes, it is a SUV-ified Mini, and so on that level it's bad. But like, from a SUV standpoint, it is the most engaging and enjoyable one out there. And if I were recommending to a car enthusiast which little luxury crossover to get, you got to get a Countryman. You just have to. They're just the most fun, the most personality, the most engaging and enjoyable. And anybody who says anything else is lying to themselves. This is also true of the Mini brand. There's a lot of criticism these days of the Mini brand that I find totally misplaced. Yes, the cars are not as cool as they were when it came out. When the Mini brand launched 20 plus years ago, there was a huge amount of enthusiast interest and support in those cars. And a lot of the people who bought the early Mini Cooper S's were car enthusiasts. It's hard to imagine that now. I tell that to younger car enthusiasts and they don't believe me, but it's true. There were a lot of car enthusiasts in those cars at the time. Now Mini is seen as a brand for sort of older people who want the retro thing. The cars still drive really well. They're still fun little hot hatches. Everybody has kind of abandoned the hot hatch segment, and a lot of those cars have gone away, and people aren't paying as much attention as they used to. But if you are, the Mini is still a fun car to drive. It is still a legitimate thrill to drive. And I still enjoy getting behind the wheel and driving a Mini. A new Mini, I think, is a fun, nice, good, fast, cool car. And yes, they're bigger now and they're four-door now and they've lost some of the fun of the old cars, but you can still get a fun, exciting, hot hatchback Mini Cooper with a manual transmission to this day. And I think there's something special about that. Even though people hate them because they're not what they used to be, they're still better than a lot of the stuff that's out there. Okay, last two cars that I disagree with everyone else. Number one, the Plymouth Prowler. A lot of people don't like this as a boomer. It's a car for boomers and it's an automatic with a Dodge Intrepid V6. All true, but it's still cool as hell. The Prowler is not great to drive, but it is so cool to look at. And it is amazing to me that even as far as the late 1990s, when there were so many regulatory challenges, a company built a car like that. From a pure automotive enthusiast standpoint, it is amazing that that car ever got to production. That is a concept car, and you can drive it around with a trailer that looks like it. It is cool as hell. And I love the Plymouth Prowler, and I think it is a really special car. It is not great to drive. It is more great from a existence standpoint, from a look at it standpoint. But you know what? There are some cars that are better to look at and cooler to just possess than to drive. And if that's one of them, so be it. I think the Prowler is a neat car, and it's a neat exercise in automobilia. On the same topic, but flip the other way, the last car where I disagree with everyone else is the Pontiac Solstice. There's a lot of complaints out there about the Solstice from enthusiasts who always complain that it was never the car that the Miata was. And that is true. The Solstice was heavier, bigger, and it never quite was. They tried to come out with a Miata, but they didn't really understand quite what made the Miata so special, which was just its small tossableness. And the Solstice lost some of that, but it did gain some other stuff. The Solstice looked better than any Miata, I think, and so did the Saturn Sky. I think they were really cool looking cars. But the other cool thing about the Solstice and the Sky was the availability of the GXP and the Redline model, which was this turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder with 260 horsepower. I love the Miata dearly, but every Miata has always felt underpowered to me, except maybe the NB Mazda Speed. The Solstice and the Sky were bigger than the Miata, but they gave you this powerful engine, which was actually pretty available. Like they were commonly seen even still. And you could really beat on it. A 260 horsepower Saturn Sky or Pontiac Solstice was a cool car. It was fun to drive. It was fast, unlike the Miata. And it may not have quite had the exact like little car charm that the Miata did. It didn't have that. But it had a lot of it. It was close, and it had a lot more power. There was more muscle to it. And I think the Solstice and the Sky are unfairly vilified for not doing the Miata formula right, when in reality what they did was a takeoff on the Miata formula that I think was actually pretty good, which was a little bigger car, a little more substantial, more expressive styling, and this massively powerful powertrain that you can get. 260 horses in a car like that is good power. And I think those cars deserve more love than they get from enthusiasts. They are also viewed as kind of a baby boomer car, you know, take it to car shows and shine it up. And I actually think if younger car enthusiasts got in a manual Sky Redline, they would be pretty impressed with how it drives dynamically, how fast it is, especially if they were coming out of something like an NC or an ND Miata. They would say, wow, you know, this may not quite be the dynamic car, but it does have performance that is pretty impressive. So there you go. The cars where I disagree with everyone else. There's not many, but there are some, and my disagreements are, I'm sure, going to elicit a lot of complaints in the comments. So I'm excited to hear them and see how you disagree with me, especially about the Lexus LFA. I know you love it. You always loved it. I know. But those are my disagreements. Remember, they are just mine, subjective opinion. You can have your own, it's fine, but that's how I feel.